Weta Workshop was kind of like visiting some wild fantasy land. It's like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, but without the candy.
I went to the Weta Workshop, which is quite unlike anything I've ever seen in my entire career, and they made everything you see in the film. They made all the armor, all the weapons. Richard Taylor, the man in charge, I think he's a genius.
He's built this workshop that is world-class in every respect.
Richard Taylor has also been one of the single most important people involved on this production, because Richard has, with enormous dedication and enthusiasm, taken on one of the most difficult jobs.
We chose to look after the design, the fabrication, and the on-set operation of the special makeup effects and prosthetics, the armor, the weapons, the creatures, and the miniatures.
I think Richard made over 45,000 different items for the film, including the miniatures and the prosthetics.
So his workload over the 3 or 4 years that he has been involved has just been phenomenal.
He's a very charismatic guy, so a very great leader. So his people were really devoted to him and to the task, and their work showed it.
Employing mainly young people whose primary expertise was not in filmmaking, but whose talents had been recognized by Richard Taylor because they were artists of one sort or another.
The Weta Workshop is very much a physical and spiritual extension of Richard Taylor and Tanya Roger, because it embodies every molecule of philosophy of Richard's work ethic.
So where do I start? Peter has told me that he wants to make Lord of the Rings, and a great fortune for us, he wants to make it with us. How do I inspire in this young group of New Zealand designers and technicians the philosophies and the vision that will carry this film for 5 years and deliver it onto the world stage in a way that's worthy to the written literature of Tolkien? Gathering around us a like-minded group of young New Zealanders, I very much believed, as I do today, what I said to them then. If you couldn't rise to the highest level of enthusiasm, passion, and professionalism and grasp this task as if it was the most important thing that you have ever taken on in your life, you weren't worthy of the task. We had been blessed with the opportunity to bring a piece of modern English folklore to the screen. So often in fantasy filmmaking, it's necessary that the actor occasionally turns to the audience and throws them a wink. You know, just buy into this, just accept that this world exists. That couldn't happen with The Lord of the Rings. It was imperative that Middle-earth was real.
Kind of like a prehistory to English and European history, that it did exist at one point. And since he was treating it that way, he was looking at it as a history, that really kind of worked its way through every fabric of the production.
But what we appreciated was that if we could hold on to a large number of the departments, we could possibly make a more cohesive approach through our design work and the delivery of the images that we put on screen.
Richard Taylor's philosophy was always ground this in reality, want gritty realism. We're making a historical film, we're not making a fantasy film. To that end, we looked at a lot of historical influences. While we didn't want to make it obvious, like you go, oh look, the elves are Greek or the dwarves are this or that. We didn't want to make it obvious like that because that's not what we're doing. What we wanted to create were alternative cultures that look like they could come straight out of history, but you're never quite sure where they're from.
The development of the cultures, the species, and the races. The development of the total physical reality of the creatures was imperative, so that this finely woven tapestry would create a backdrop of heightened reality upon which the actors could play out this incredible story.
There are so many races and cultures in Lord of the Rings, and it would be very easy for many of us as designers who are familiar with the material to really indulge ourselves a little bit in it and just develop these cultures to the nth degree. But what we needed to do was really make them so they were accessible to general audiences who hadn't read the Lord of the Rings as well.
Daniel seemed to grasp everything that was good in Middle-earth. All the elves, the beautiful swords that the elves carry, He was able to design the richness of the cultures of these particular characters. But brooding underneath the harsh cloud of Mordor on the other side of the room was Warren Mahi. He looked after the Uruk-hai. He did a lot of the orc design, the goblins, anything that was nasty and spiky came out of Warren's pencil. A year into our design process and a year into the project, we had the great fortune of Alan Lee and John Howe joining us.
We'd already adopted some of their sort of stylistic interpretations into our interpretation. However, when they came on board, it really gave us a solid grounding and also a tremendous upskilling and a tremendous experience base to draw from, because here are these amazingly talented guys who've been living and dreaming Tolkien for years.
They'd broken a lot of ground for the weaponry, the armor, and the creatures, which was their primary mandate. And because we were working on the same floor, in the same set of buildings, there was a lot of fraternization going on. We would be, above all me, I'd be wandering out to see what they were up to and see what they were drawing, and it was very stimulating because seeing someone else treat any given subject, you've got only one desire, is to have a shot at it yourself.
Everything was kind of thrown into the melting pot, really, and people would give us feedback, and we'd go off and do another day's work, and have something ready for the next design meeting.
Now, Jamie Best-Warwick and Mike Asquith didn't draw. They're sculptors, and they can conceptualize through three-dimensional sculpture as quickly as an illustrator can come up with ideas through drawing. We always start off with tiny little what we call thumb maquettes, tiny little studies that are done extremely quickly that just begin to capture the feeling of form. And then from those, working on top of precast either third scale busts or sixth scale figures, we'll conceptualize the characters. Jamie Best-Warwick did a number of original sculptures, one-offs, that are in the final film today. It was incredible how quickly he was able to capture Peter's vision and deliver designs that carried on through to final shots on screen.
What orders from Mordor, my lord?
As you stepped down the stairs, it was like going into a manufacturing zone, but not in the sense of a production. It was like going into the depths of Middle-earth. As you came around the corner and stepped into the studio, the enormity of what we were doing began to strike, mostly from the first effect, which was looking at the stone trolls that would be glowering back at you. But as you moved through the studio, there were the huge towering miniatures on either side, crammed in there. You literally had to weave your way through these huge buildings that were just all teetering and just sitting in position, packed into that studio.
There is something special about using miniatures that Peter loves, and Peter wanted to do as much of this on large miniatures as he could. So Richard Taylor set about the task of building, as I say, these 58 very, very large miniatures.
On Lord of the Rings, we coined the phrase bigatures because over half of the miniatures that we built at the Weta Workshop were the size of sound stages. Mary McLaughlin and John Baster and the other miniatures teams did a beautiful job to make this immense size.
The mill in Hobbiton, Richard really came up one day and with a photocopy of the sketch and said, right, it's about yay long and about yay wide, right? And I said, yeah, I guess so, sure. And they went away, and a week later this incredible model had emerged which looked exactly like the sketch.
I've never done a picture with this many miniatures. I don't think anybody's done a picture with this many miniatures. Because one of the things that Peter chose to do was, where in many cases we would have done a matte painting, he's chosen to use a miniature instead. Or a miniature with a slight bit of matte painting to blend it into live action. So we're doing a huge number of shots where we're dropping a miniature behind the live action scene, which is wonderful because it means that we get the beauty of the live action, and then we're able to expand it and amplify it and create the environment into which this live action scene will play. And that's pretty neat.
Now, the journey of bringing a creature to the screen is quite an enjoyable one. Of course, it starts with the incredible amount of conceptual design. Then we roll on and do the three-dimensional maquettes, slowly honing the form and the character and the study of each creature.
After that, we would sculpt larger sculptures that you could really get into the details on and work them out. And often those sculptures were then scanned for the digital department to replicate in 3 dimensions if it was going to be a digital character, or they would be molded and turned into masks if it was going to be a prosthetic character.
One of the most enjoyable characters to create for Lord of the Rings was the creature, the Watcher in the Water. And it was important to us that we didn't just create a sort of a bizarre tentacled kraken, this thing that was a mess of massive number of tentacles, but rather it, like everything in Middle-earth, was in pursuit of the ring. We also wanted the feeling that when it burst out of the water, it would appear to increase in size, sort of like the swelling of an octopus or the hairs coming up on an angry cat. So these unusual shell-like structures that carry these villi of hair that filtrate the nutrients out of the water swell up and open up like these big shells to give the creature added aggression and added size. What appears to be this gummy maw finally rolls out and becomes a huge set of teeth. I described it to the guys as if it's this bizarre sphincter, and would actually act it out with my hands as if the teeth roll out, and there they are biting at the end of my fingers. Each tentacle ended in 2 fingers and an opposing thumb. So when Frodo is grabbed by the leg and lifted up, these tentacles can try and find out where the ring is. John Howe has illustrated the Balrog many times, and there was a great number of elements in his original designs that Peter loved.
It's like lava in a thin shell, and the heat that it radiates is just phenomenal.
We wanted the feeling that this was some sort of bizarre bull hybrid with a dog. It's got a whip-lashing lizard's tail, these knuckly toes, and this huge backbone crest of flame that erupts to show its heightened anger. It's got these large bull horns that come around to the front of its face. Ben Wooten, one of our senior designers, took those original design drawings of John Howe's and built on them in close accordance with John's thoughts to create a final large-scale design maquette that stood about 4 to 5 foot tall, that perfectly captured all of the elements that we wanted in this creature. Peter would come into our design studio each day to critique our work and give us his thoughts, and as he has always done over the years, would actually perform the character. He would lumber around the design room pulling these great faces, and very quickly inspired Jamie and the other designers with the ideas of what the cave troll could be. And Jamie very quickly captured the feeling of this slightly moronic, slow, childlike character that has all the trappings of a creature that is relatively quiet and docile until it's provoked into a rage. We wanted the feeling that the cave troll would sit in hibernation for many years, so all of its underbelly is soft and fleshy-like, where the backs of its body that's exposed to the elements becomes like the cracking on the back of a well-worn foot. He also has these unusual fingers. He has these nails that don't so much grow from underneath the quick, but are actually a part of the overall end of the fingers. And these are used as huge shovels for digging into the dirt and helping mine in the mines of Moria and dig out little hollows for its hibernation in winter. This then is skinned and plasticine, carefully detailed and sculpted to replicate the look of the original design maquette exactly. And it is this larger maquette that then the digital department scans to capture all of the complexity and fine detail of the surface finish, as well as the overall form, into the computer, and in doing so, make sure that the art of the design team at the Weta Workshop is carried through into the digital realm. Now, the department that we oversaw at Weta that required the most extensive amount of work was the realisation of the creatures through prosthetics. Although we had small and subtle prosthetics for a lot of the lead actors, the most prolific amount of prosthetic work was used on those that are evil in Middle-earth. The Uruk-hai, the goblins, and of course the orcs.
Peter wanted something special for the goblins of Moria. We drew all kinds of crazy creatures that you could never hope to get anyone inside a suit to play those, but making them into these sort of insect-like creatures with uncomfortable spikes, and I think Jamie probably sculpted up the actual faces they have.
Over the length of 3 films, we produced over 10,000 facial appliances, over 1,800 bodysuits in foam latex.
We brought that in by the container load. Every couple of months we'd have a new container of foam latex arrive. It was purely brought into the workshop to make the thousands of hobbit feet, the suits of Uruk-hai and orc undergarment bodies.
The foam latex ovens ran 365 days a year for 3.5 years to manufacture the massive amount of appliances out of 3 huge ovens.
It was amazing how much foam latex we used. I could never have visualised that quantity.
All of the prosthetics then had to be washed, seamed, painted, and stored on racks ready to go out on set. Prosthetics have a very limited life. Facial appliances only last a day, and full suits only last 6 days before they're requiring to be returned to the workshop for either servicing or to be ground up into foam pellets and thrown away.
On top of that too had to come all the paint and the specific sort of prosthetic materials and makeups in order to service the application on set. They also had to be imported from LA.
We had a team of 12 makeup artists operating under Marjorie Hamlin and Dominique Till, who looked after respectively the 1st and 2nd unit prosthetic requirements for Weta Workshop. Each day, a multitude of characters would be applied into elaborate facial appliances and then put into full foam latex bodysuits. Teeth would go in, contact lenses, and the wigs would finally be fitted to create the overall feeling of these unusual creatures. We'd been working for over a year to develop the feet for the hobbits. Possibly one of the trickiest things that we made on Lord of the Rings, because we had to make a compound that was both tough yet flexible. In one casting, you could blend it onto the foot and it would invisibly blend around the ankle line while still giving enough support to the bottom of the actor's feet. We produced over 1,800 pairs of hobbit feet for the 4 leads alone.
You know, because the Weta guys back at the shop are constantly taking the feedback from these guys and making little design adjustments. But for a long time, when I would walk, the feet would kind of bounce, you know? They'd kind of bounce a little bit. And now these are actually amazing. I haven't even noticed it. They're really amazing. So what you try and do is to get a little grip action, and but not too much, because it doesn't actually bend at the knuckle. But there's things when you like walk on a toe, you learn how to kind of work the foot a little bit. You know, you can kind of have it sitting there. Unless a kid comes to visit the set and you say, "Oh yeah, these are my feet." Oh, sorry.
They'd settle their feet into these pre-glued foam latex appliances, and then over the next hour to hour and a half, the feet would be very carefully glued to every millimetre of their own feet. If they weren't glued properly, they'd become very quickly detached from their own feet and they'd begin to slide in the prosthetics. Finally, the blending edge was carefully applied around their ankle and the colour was blended up their legs. The little hair pieces that gave the furry impression on the top of the feet had to be hand knotted, one hair at a time, every day. Then they go off to the production makeup trailer, where their ears were glued on by the makeup staff. So a day in the life of a hobbit was very much a matter of having to know that you were slipping into those sticky, cold, rubbery feet and then throwing yourself into any environment that New Zealand could offer up for the whole day and just put up with the feeling on the undersole of your feet.
I would go to Weta all the time. I was fascinated with what they were doing.
Liv would often come down to the workshop and sit with us and just talk over things, be involved in the making of stuff, actually sit for her own sculptures and get to know the guys really well.
So we all had to have these face casts done. And I went in to have it done, and I really didn't know what to expect at all. And laid back, and they kind of strapped my hair down and put Vaseline or something on my face. And just suddenly, within seconds, first my eyes, then my mouth, and then just everywhere, this enormously thick, horrible goo came over me. And when they finally took it off, there's like this great suction that happens when they finally take it off, where you can't breathe for a couple of minutes. And I had this weird, like, kind of face. It's just really funny.
I have quite a large nose, and it should have been sufficient for Gandalf's, but once you expand the size of your head with facial hair, then your own features might tend to get a little bit lost in it, and to exaggerate the prominence of a nose sort of keeps everything matching. And it took 2 or 3 days and a variety of tries to get what we all thought was right, simply because you can design a makeup on paper, but once you then apply it to a particular face, it may not turn out quite as you intended.
Gandalf, we could pass through the mines of Moria. My cousin Balin would give us a royal welcome.
There is no actor involved in Lord of the Rings that sustained more difficult prosthetics time than John Rhys Davies. At all turns, he tried to make the whole process as enjoyable for himself and Gino, the makeup artist in charge of looking after him.
Today I'm painting a set of Gimli's prosthetics, and he's got this cowl piece that he's going to be wearing. That'll slip on over his head. They'll put that on first, and then the prosthetics will be put on. Then just the forehead here. The forehead will go on. And then we've got the nose and cheek pieces.
Every day he would come in, his face would be cleaned, his hair put back, a final shave of any stubble, and the process began. 4.5 hours later, the foam latex head appliance, the ears, the silicone facial appliances, the huge amount of hand-knotted hair, beard, moustache was applied to turn John Rhys Davies into the character that you see as Gimli.
And I always try to make it my business. Whenever I was in costume and in makeup and I had the armor and all that on, and I was close enough, I would go back and show them the results of their work as it actually looked on, and show them what they'd done.
As you walked into the armour department, there was a different feeling. There was always a frenzied feeling in the armour department because there was a transformation going on all the time. There was armour being created out of leather, very organic armour, very gritty and grim. Certain parts of the armour department had fantastic array of metals and buckles and rivets and all the sorts of things that would hold it all together. Then you'd move through into the area that was where the steel armour was made, and that in itself was a huge experience because of the fact that the sound itself of the metal being beaten onto an anvil was so loud and so organic that you just couldn't help feeling like you were sort of a part of Middle-earth in there.
John Howe is one of the world's leading people in the understanding of medieval armour and weapons. When John arrived, he was able to bring to Weta a level of design knowledge, fabrication, and some of the complexities of the construction of armour that we didn't understand at that point.
Armor is the most impossible thing to understand and to render illustratively, because all of these static shapes interact with each other in very, very surprising ways, and it's nearly impossible to understand unless you have some fairly serious layman's knowledge about how it works. It's always frightening and astonishing about how beautiful it all is. But I've worn a lot of the real stuff because I'm one of these really thin guys who can get into it all.
He was able to let us know what worked and what didn't, why things were built in a certain way. And that level of inheritance and that level of culture and history that he was able to invest into our armor making process was a wonderful thing for us at that point in the making of Lord of the Rings.
You can design your heart out, for months with a pencil and a paper, but the actual materials themselves, whether it's leather or wood or stone or metal, will lead your hand to shapes and ideas that you cannot arrive at just with a pencil and paper.
We also had the great fortune of finding 2 armor smiths. In the tiny country that is New Zealand, here was 2 guys that were making a living from the fabrication of plate armor. Stu Johnson and Warren Green.
Now, building a forge in the workshop was, Richard was very excited about that idea. He really wanted to approach the whole idea in as traditional a manner as possible. And the only way to do that is to get the stuff hot and to use a hammer and get it on an anvil and do it the way it should be done.
So to that end, every single piece of armor was originally created in plate steel, hand-beaten in the forge here at the workshop. Through designing the Urukai's armor, we wanted to give a feeling of a brutal and almost intuitive armor and weapons. These creatures are only armored on their fronts. There's no armor on their backs because they would never run from the field of battle. These are the lightweight guerrilla fighting force that are sent out to hunt down the hobbits. They don't carry any heavy armor as they have to travel huge distances at great speed. Their helmets are made in a combination of leather and lightweight steel. The idea of all the spiky bits of leather is so as they're running through the forest, these things will bounce and move around, further creating the level of ferocity in their appearance as they charge along. The orcs aren't bad at making armor, they just make really ugly armor. And their armor is very, very successful. As you can see by this set of leather gauntlets, they've managed to create articulated lames, and their black speech motifs are tattooed into the leather to put their own incantations of evil into the leather surface. The concept behind these Maori orcs, Peter said that he wanted them to look like cockroaches scuttling in mass, these black, dark, nasty suits of armor. Now, we based this helmet on a sort of a deep sea fish, theorizing that most of their food would come through the deep cracks of the earth where these fish may be washed into these deep caverns. The helmet very much takes on the perception of this huge mouth of this deep sea fish. But the feeling we wanted to get with Sauron's helmet was the feeling of a corpse, of the rotting face of a horse corpse, with those long bony structures coming out of those deep-set socketed eyes, those great big nostrils for sucking in and blowing out a lot of air. The intaglio was put on as a lithographic process that then was acid etched using sulfuric and hydrochloric acid to eat the surface of the metal, to give the appearance that the surface of the steel is crawling with this wicked ivory all over it. Now here is a Gondorian suit of armour from the prologue, a combination of plate steel underneath, covered by this tunic, encrusted with the heraldry of the Tree of Gondor, the son of Numenor. Encrusting the armour of the Gondor is these helmets. They carry the seabird's wings of the Gondorian motif. The antiquity of the helmet is such that it's made out of separate components. But an interesting feature is the way that we've actually glued the hair into the helmet. This is so the makeup department don't need to put wigs onto the actors every day. This is from the allegiance of men and elves as they fought with Sauron and the orcs at the plains of Golgoroth. The prologue elves are in the springtime of their years, so we tried to capture a motif, a colour, a palette of spring, the subtle greens, the succulent plant textures of the fabric. This is a race that is coming to the world, a race that is in the strengths of its time. It's got the insignia on the nose bar of the helmet.
The feeling that you used to have when you were standing surrounded by all this armour was that it felt as though it had been discovered on an archaeological dig. It had that sort of realism about it. What was so deceptive is it wasn't. It was made out of plastic, urethane, all those sorts of materials that are so modern today. But in actual fact, the look of it had that detail and realism so well captured that it really did sort of deceive people.
Chainmail is a problem. Chainmail is a cinema nightmare, and there is no convincing way to make any approximation of chainmail without a stroke of genius, and most chainmail in movies is just awful. It's terrifyingly bad. It's either knitted wool that's been sprayed with aluminium paint, or it's made of, whatever, and it always looks crappy. It never looks like the real thing.
Richard came up with this new technique to create chainmail that was fairly light so that you wouldn't weigh down your actors, but much, much, much more real looking.
So they actually devised a way of making it out of plastic. And the thing that they developed entirely in the workshop, under the guidance of Richard and Dominic, one of his chief geniuses, so they purchased pressure hose, which is of the right diameter for a link of chainmail, which they would slit down the length. And they devised a machine which would chop it into tiny slices.
This machine is driven by pneumatics, controlled by an electrical servo, and over 3.5 years, it cut 12.5 million rings from a length of black alkathene pipe, over 12 kilometres of pipe. And then two gentlemen at Weta sat for the same length of time and hand-assembled those 12.5 million rings into hundreds of garments of incredibly lightweight chain mail.
I have never seen an industry like that. This guy happily sort of linking little bits of chain mail together. I think he said with my armor that he'd linked 80,000 pieces of chain mail together.
I would not have traded this experience for the world. It has been the most amazing time of my life.
No person was more important to the weapons than Peter Lyon. Peter had been making a collection of weapons over the years for the reenactment business in New Zealand.
Pretty spectacular. I love the hero weapons, and you pick up one of those swords, the hero swords, and you realize you're holding a real sword, a real weapon in your hand. Very well balanced. Incredible craftsmanship, and many of these pieces belong in museums.
Since I've started here, I've been working on things that are sort of the swords I've dreamed about working on, and I've also had nightmares about some of them. Some of them have been very fiddly. In particular, what have we got? Narsil is a good example.
Narsil is actually, I'm sure, the only sword that's ever been designed with a hollow pommel, but it's still got enough weight to make it work. So sword fans, please be aware this is the first hollow pommel that has ever appeared on the screen.
Now, all of this obviously takes a huge amount of person power. Over 100 weapons were made in this style, where they were actually made in spring steel, exactly as they were 500 years ago. The fullers are individually ground in by eye against a huge linishing table. to set the balance on the blade. The hilts have been hand ground out of either plate steel or cast out of bronze. And a sword like this would take about a week. Lying next to it again is Glamdring, the sword that Gandalf wields so heroically and magically at times. Once again, it has the incantations of the elf speech woven into the crossbar to try and strengthen it in times of battle. You can see by the blade there's the subtlest wasting of the blade through the length of the blade, and that's to give it a slight leaf-like form, to give it the feeling of organic, nature-based forms within the blade.
Sting. Yeah, take it. It's so light. Yes, yeah, made by the elves, you know.
I remember the day that I saw Sting for the first time, and it was sort of in its infancy. It wasn't completed yet. But I'd already seen like the elvish inscriptions that they'd done on a metal Sting.
Now, Sting has the same cultural inheritance as Glamdring does, Gandalf's sword. The handle is made out of kokobo, a hard wood from South Africa, and then it has a silver intaglio that has been hand-laid into the wood, finally being capped by a fairly simple but elegant hilt.
You know, Boromir's sword is a strong man's sword. It's made for someone with very, very thick wrists.
Boromir, of course, a descendant of Gondor, carries a one-handed fighting sword. It's actually a hand and a half. You can fight with it single-handedly, but the pommel is extended enough that if you want to draw into a two-handed blow, you have got the space to put your hand up onto the crossbar. The swords have to be balanced quite comfortably through just in front of the crossbar. It makes for quite a beautiful fighting sword. Sean Bean was very enjoyed flinging this weapon around.
When you do get your sword, that becomes quite personal to you, and you get familiar with it, but you feel as though it is part of your body. I mean, it's an extension of your arm, and we all took great pride in that.
Legolas carries a quiver of arrows on his back. We made over 10,000 arrows for Lord of the Rings. Every race and every species has a different sort of arrow. Every arrow has its own head design. This has got a little floral motif on the actual blade of the head. It carries a green fletch on it. This is his quiver, but carried in his quiver are the white knives, his fighting knives. And you can see it has got an elven etching down the blade. The handle is inlaid with a gold etching that's laid into the timber. It's got boxwood as the timber of the handles. These he carries over his back, and he's able to draw both at the same time. You can see here the collection of axes that were required just for Gimli. He carries two little throwing axes. These are carried at his sides. He pops them out, and he can then freely throw them as if they're a tomahawk. He carries his walking axe. This he carries to actually use as a walking stick as he walks along, but always at the ready in case of an enemy nearby. Then he has a very simple axe, which is just a standard fighting axe that he carries on his side. And then finally his double-headed axe, which he most commonly likes to use when taking on the orc. This he carries on his back. By a shrug of his shoulders and a flick of the wrist, he can pull it out of the back holster and quickly grab it, ready to take on the enemy. We tried to once again inherit the culture of the different species, as you can see here with the geometry and the geometrics of the dwarven design into the head of the axe. And even the way that the leather has been laid onto the handle takes on the geometric nature of the architecture of Moria. We made a number of different versions of each actor's sword. Spring steel, heavy hero swords for tight close-ups, lighter weight aluminium swords for fighting scenes, rubber versions for safety reasons. But Vigo, of all the actors, chose almost predominantly only to use the hero sword.
I used it as much as I could, yeah, because it just would look more right. And also just the weight of it in your hand and how tired you would become, you know. It looks silly when you do a big battle sequence if everybody's like, all the time. You know, at a certain point, you kind of miss, you deflect, you can't keep that amount of energy going all the time.
He caught us out as well. On arriving at Weta, he said to me, "So how would I keep it sharp?"
I asked for a sharpening stone, because if you know you're fighting that many times and you're parrying that many times and cutting through, you know, armor and all that, I mean, you need to sharpen your sword now and then.
So indeed we went ahead and cast up a little urethane replication of a whetstone, so that in theory Strider could sharpen the edge of his sword. His sword was quite unusual because built into the scabbard was a little utility knife, a little tiny dagger that's not used in any way for fighting, but really an eating knife.
Things like the eating knife that's part of the scabbard for the sword, it's just a practical thing, you know. What do you clean a rabbit or a deer with? You're not going to use your sword, you know what I mean?
I remember he came in and he was just really quiet. He was just really quite quiet, and he had this sort of steely look about him. And he picked up his sword, and it just, you know, it's like, and he was like, can I take this? Can I take this with me?
Vigo treated that sword as if it was almost a holy relic that he carried by his side. It was wonderful for the sword makers and the technicians at Weta to see an actor accept the mantle of a character so fully through the use of the props that we had created. The greatest benefit for Weta Workshop, having taken on the 5 departments that we did, was that this singular Tolkien-esque brushstroke could be applied across as much of the workshop as possible. I was able to understand Peter's thoughts and then invest those thoughts through the designers into the individuals within the workshop.
It's just been phenomenal. His workshop is packed with stuff, and he has a huge team of people. They have really led the charge in creating the different cultures of the various races of Middle-earth and the look of the weapons and swords. And without that team of people, these films would never have gotten made. It's as simple as that.